As we turn now to the final chapter of the book of Ruth, and we've entitled the book of Ruth for our study, A Story of Faithful Redemption, because, boy, it didn't start off so well there in the house of bread, what the name Bethlehem means. There in the house of bread, there was great lack, and Elimelech and his family, they ended up going to Moab to find better conditions. And they found some blessings there, certainly, with the wives that the sons took, Ruth and Orpah, but they didn't find lasting peace or prosperity or longevity there, as all of the men passed away, the father and the sons, leaving his wife and her now young widowed daughter-in-laws. And Naomi decided to return home, giving her well wishes and her blessings to her daughter-in-laws. And Ruth said, "No, I'm going where you're going. I will lie where you lie. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my gods. And may great curses come to me if I do not fulfill this vow." And so Naomi, Naomi with Ruth returned back to Bethlehem, and her name being Joy, she said, "No, call me now only Sorrow." And so that was how the first chapter went, and just tragedy upon tragedy, difficulties compounding. Then in the second chapter and the third, we find Ruth doing her best to, as the poor were allowed, to glean in the fields during the harvest, and for 2 harvests, wheat and barley both. She gleaned in Boaz's field. She was well regarded. She was allowed to be with the maidens and to eat with them at mealtime, to take water with them at the well, to have even direct harvesting, not having to wait for the workers to go to go by and receive only the gleaning. She was given a regular part. She was sent home with gifts as well to her mother-in-law. After this went a while, and Naomi could tell, because of the nature of Boaz's character, and because of the generosity which he had continually shown Ruth, Naomi had decided that I think that this would be a good way to secure a future for Ruth permanently, if she would ask Boaz to redeem a field. Remember, under the law of Moses, each family was given an allotment of land directly by God. It was their right, if they'd ever had to sell it, for it to be returned to them by the process of redemption, for a price to be paid for the one who had, or the descendants of the one who had bought it. It was held always with an idea of trust for that original family. And Naomi said, "We'd like to call back in the trust. We'd like to have that land in our name again." And with that, we find goes Naomi. She would be the family that is with the land, the family to whom the land is now attached by her marriage and by her coming into Israel. And so the offer was basically to have someone take the land. They would get that, which would be desirable. They'd also get a wife in Ruth. And we find Boaz did find that to be desirable, and he found himself complimented in that, and that Ruth would have regard for the ways of the people of God and their peculiar customs regarding land ownership and the like. And also, here's an older gentleman who'll have a wife. Don't know if it's first one or second one or so. We know there was polygamy in the land in those days, and we have no idea of the status of Boaz in regard to any prior marriage, or is he now a widower, or is he never married? We just do not know. But we find that when the offer was made for him to be the redeemer of the land and of the women, it was found out that there was one other kinsman who had a closer claim. And so we pick up the story in Ruth chapter 4, verse 1. Ruth chapter 4 and verse 1, where the nearer kinsman is offered the land. And with the land will come Ruth and and her obligation to her mother-in-law. And so you're going to gain a wife and a mother-in-law if you want this piece of property, which is evidently of itself desirable. So verse 1 of Ruth 4. Now Boaz went up to the gate and sat down there. And behold, the close relative of whom Boaz spoke was passing by. And so he's be a relative to Elimelech. He's a relative to Boaz. And so he says to his cousin or, great nephew or second cousin twice removed, whatever exactly the relationship was. These men are friendly with each other, have a good conversation, and they're of some kin. Probably not all that close, but of some kin. And so he says, turn aside, friend, sit down here. And so taking the offer, he turned aside and sat down. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city. And he said, sit down here. So they sat down. So the elders are meeting at the gate, as was the custom of the time. And so now the elders are there. And so it's obviously some piece of a formal business that must be attended to. And he said to that closest relative, Naomi, who's come back from the land of Moab, has to sell the piece of land which belonged to our brother Elimelech. Ah, okay. So land. Might always on the lookout for a good opportunity, have a chance to get some land. So he says, I thought to inform you, saying, buy it before those sitting here. So that would be the record of the deed in today's parlance. That would be the legal way to do it. Buy it openly and honestly and publicly, and everybody would know that, yeah, he bought that. We're witnesses. So buy it before these men sitting here, before the elders of my people. And if you'll redeem it, redeem it. But if not, tell me that I may know. For there is no one but you to redeem it, and I'm after you. So here's the situation. This is the land that is possible to obtain and keep here in the family. That under duress, we can't let that duress cause it to leave the family. It's ours by lot, and it's a trust of the Lord's. And so the relative says, hey, land, I'll take it. Then Boaz says, on the day you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of the deceased, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance. So it's a package deal. There's the land, and with it comes the lady. Now, we know that Boaz knows this lady well, that she has been with his servants and his maids for 2 harvests now. He has respect for her. She's asked for his protection. She's asked for him to take care of her, provide it permanently for her and her mother-in-law. And then this Boaz informs the man, this is how it will be. Now, this custom of marrying a near relative, normally we think of it as the brother's duty to brother. Here it seems to be a bit farther out. And the law specified brothers. But we do know at times in the Scripture, the word brother does also apply to relationships that are cousins. And so just because someone is called a brother, and again, in a tribe, everyone's related, right? That's how you have a tribe. Everyone's related. So there are times when brother is extended to brother-in-laws, like we do today, or cousins, which again, we commonly, or at least some people do that in some occasions. It was the closest of relationship. So the law had said, if brothers dwell together, this is Deuteronomy 25:5. If brothers dwell together and one of them dies and has no son, the widow of the dead man shall not be married to a stranger outside her family, but her husband's brother will go to her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. So a husband's brother, we would normally call that a brother-in-law. So the brother-in-law had a duty to take care of with his brother's wife, to raise a son in his name. It would say in Deuteronomy that the name of the firstborn would succeed the name of his dead brother, and his name would not be blotted from Israel. So you'd count one is a son of the first husband. And so the memory would be there. And it was a grave crime if someone refused to do that. There's one well-known case in the scripture. Onan did refuse to raise up a son in his brother's name, and he was greatly cursed for doing that. Now, we often call this, and this is where things get a little more confused, I think, than they sometimes ought to be, but we call this the law of levirate marriage. Levirate marriage, because of course, the word lever means brother-in-law in Latin. So we in English use a Latin term to describe this Hebrew practice, just to make sure that everybody gets good and confused. So it's the law of levirate marriage. It's Deuteronomy 25. If a man doesn't want to do that, he could refuse, not like Onan, by duplicity and taking advantage of the woman for it seems his own lust, but yet still refusing to raise up a son. Not like Onan, he was in grave error for what he did, but there was a way in which a man could refuse this obligation, but he had to do it publicly. And even in this case, where it was done openly and in a more honorable fashion, there would be some shame in the fact that the man didn't fulfill this duty. If the man says, I refuse, then in Deuteronomy 25:8, the elders of the city would speak to him. If he stands firm, he says, I don't wish to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his shoe, spit in his face, and say, so it will be to the man who will not build up his brother's house. And his name shall be called in all Israel, the house of him who had his sandal removed. Now, we'd probably think that's a silly nickname, but something about shoes in the Middle Eastern culture has a lot more shame involved than we would think. So in any case, there was a law. It's been appealed to. And here Boaz is offering his relative, who is unnamed and not shamed in this. It's offering to him to do this. But then the relative said, verse 6, back to Ruth, I cannot redeem this for myself. He says, lest I jeopardize my own inheritance. Redeem it for yourself, and you may have my right of redemption, for I cannot redeem it. And so just for the land, he thought that was a fine idea. But realizing there's a marriage involved, and realizing that this son would be in the name of Mahlon, Ruth's father, or Ruth's husband, or Elimelech, Ruth's father-in-law, he says, that's going to mess up my inheritance plans. Maybe it'd mess up his the marriage that he had with his wife, or the marriage he had pending. But somehow he comes up with what sounds, at least, I think, probably like a plausible excuse. Well, whether it's true or not, who knows? But here's somebody that appears to be eager to take on the responsibility. And so it is that another man is not eager. And so we'll just make a friendly agreement to let you take this on. Thanks for asking. Verse 7, that was the custom in the former times in Israel concerning the redemption and exchange of land. To confirm a matter, a man removed his sandal and gave it to another. And this is the manner of the attestation in Israel. Again, I don't quite get the shoe stuff, but there it is in the text. So the close relative said to Boaz, buy it for yourself. And he removed his sandal. So there's no Ruth doesn't have to come spit in anybody's face. There doesn't have to be any shame. There doesn't have to be any stigma to this, except we know what an opportunity he missed out on, what blessings of God he missed out on by not taking Ruth. Now, just quickly, and we could spend a lot of time in textual diving, but the question of marrying one from Moab, that does come up here. We recall that in Exodus 34, there was instructions when you go to the land of Canaan and you see all the things that are there, and you live among the tribes that are there. It says, don't make a covenant with them. You have a covenant with God. Don't make a covenant with these Canaanites. I'm going to drive out before you the Ammonite and the Canaanite, the Hittite and the Perizzite and the Hivite and the Jebusite. Watch for yourselves, and you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. And a little bit later in Exodus 34, do not take some of their daughters for your sons, or that his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlots with their gods. It's repeated again in Deuteronomy 7. When God brings you to the land that you're going to possess and clears the nations away, nations bigger and stronger than you, when God delivers you from all them, and it lists the 7, destroy them, make no covenant, show them no favor, do not intermarry with them. And later in the book of Ezra, that prohibition, this is after the captivity, a long time after the time of Judges, but in the book of Ezra, that prohibition is they're reminded of, and it's expanded even to include the Ammonites and the Moabites. Ezra 9:1, you have not separated yourselves from the people of the land according to their abominations. Those are the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites. And now the list is a little bit different. It mentions also the Moabites and the Egyptians and the Amorites. And so early on, there was no prohibition, particularly with the Egyptians. There was or those of Moab. So it wasn't a direct prohibition, but later it would be expanded there because they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves, the men of Israel have, and their sons, so the holy race is intermingled with the people of the land. And the princes, it says, and the rulers have been foremost in this unfaithfulness. And again, it's written in Nehemiah 13. They read from the book of Moses on the hearing of the people that it was found that it was written that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever enter the assembly of God. And they weren't to enter the assembly of God in Deuteronomy 23 for 10 generations. There was to be, for 10 generations, they were to be kept out. Now, 10 generations might be a literal 10, or it might be the kind of a perfect 10, which means don't do it forever. But there are these restrictions. And so sometimes some have wondered, how is it that that doesn't come up here? Why is that not here? And, you know, if this fellow, if this had been objectionable, because she's one of Moab, we would think that this relative who refused her would have said, yeah, I'll take the land, but not the Moabitess, right? But nobody ever brings up an objection to anything of Ruth, to Ruth being in Naomi's house, to Ruth being taken as a wife by Boaz. I think one commentator rightly said this. He said, Boaz did not marry Ruth the pagan, worshiper of Chemosh, that's the goddess, or the god of the Moabites. Boaz did not marry Ruth the pagan worshiper of Chemosh, but Ruth the dedicated follower of God. She'd already made a confession of the covenant. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. And Boaz had said to her back in chapter 3, he said, the Lord reward your work. Your wages will be full from Jehovah, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to seek refuge. And so I don't think that those restrictions and instructions about those of Moab apply in this, but rather instead the promise that was said by Isaiah, again, many years later, but this is a foretaste and a picture of what Isaiah would later speak of, Isaiah 56. Thus says the Lord, preserve justice and do righteousness, for my salvation is about to come and my righteousness to be revealed. How blessed is the man who does this, the son of the man who takes hold of it, who keeps from profaning the Sabbath and keeps his hand from doing any evil. Here we go. Let not the foreigner who's joined himself to the Lord say, the Lord will surely separate me from his people. Nor let the eunuch say, behold, I'm a dry tree. For thus says the Lord to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, and who choose what pleases me, and hold fast my covenant. To them I will give in my house and within my walls a memorial, and a name that's better than that of sons and daughters. And I will give them the everlasting name that will not be cut off. Also the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, and to love the name of the Lord, to be his servants. Let everyone who keeps from profaning the Sabbath, and holds fast my covenant. Even those I will bring to my holy mountain, and I will make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house will be called the house of prayer for all peoples. So I think that is a prophecy about the church eventually, but I think it's fulfilled also in such things as we see here, that God welcomes these who, though they were foreigners, they honor him and his law, and he has blessed them. So Boaz has asked the other man, would you like to redeem that which is through Elimelech and Mahlon? And he says, I'd like to, but then when he finds out that it comes with Ruth, he said no. And then so Boaz said, well, that's fine. They made the agreement. And now Boaz has the right as well as the familial obligation to take care of these things. And so Boaz, verse 9, Boaz says to the elders of the people, you're all witnesses today that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilon and to Mahlon. Moreover, I have acquired Ruth, the Moabitess, the widow of Mahlon, to be my wife, in order to raise up the name of the deceased on his inheritance, so that the name of the deceased may not be cut off from his brothers, or from the place or the court of his birthplace. You are witnesses today. And all the people who were in the court, the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, both of whom built a house for Israel. And may you achieve the wealth of Ephratah and become famous in Bethlehem. Oh my, did they but not even know? And so, yes, he became the first famous resident of Bethlehem. And how many famous residents of Bethlehem do we not end up with? And so he became famous in Bethlehem. Moreover, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, through the offspring which the Lord shall give you by this young woman. And so it's interesting, they be as blessed as Tamar and fruitful like her. That's not the most savory and family-friendly of stories, is it? But here is a large portion of the tribe of Judah came through that union. And everyone in the tribe of Judah is related to her, right? They are. And so here we find one of the women of Judah. We'll also find out that Rahab, the one who was spared from Jericho with her faithful treatment of the spies, it's one of Boaz's relatives that she married. And so that woman makes an appearance in the lineage as well. And now, of course, Ruth. So we've got Tamar, we've got Rahab, and we've got Ruth. All women, either of foreign or, shall we say, what is the proper word? Maybe possibly dubious, or at least checkered. Well, let's say checkered. Women either of foreign or checkered past, who are in the genealogy that will lead through this book directly to David, and thus, of course, on to the Messiah. And so they are blessed, and we find out that the blessing is not just an empty blessing, or not just the blessing of men. It is the fullness of the blessing of God, which is given them. Verse 13, so Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her. And the Lord, Jehovah, enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Remembering back all the way to the earliest birth, where Eve said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. And so it is that they had asked for the Lord's blessing on this union, and she was blessed with conception and with a son. Then the women said to Naomi, the one who had left them in sadness and came back worse, the women said to Naomi, blessed is Jehovah, who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name be famous in Israel. Oh, but did they not know? How famous did they become? All this whole family, how famous did they become in all of Israel? May he also be to you a restorer of life and a sustainer in your old age. So what comes with redemption? Restoration and sustenance. And for your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him in her lap and became his nurse. So imagine grandma inseparable from her new grandbaby, the one for whom many years she would have thought she would never see. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And so they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse. The text continues. So let's see it on there. He's the father of Jesse, the father of David. So Obed, father of Jesse, father of David. And so we know the genealogy from there. When we go to the New Testament, we have a rehearsing of the genealogy from here to from Perez back to who is the son of Judah. We need to be reminded of that Perez was the son of Judah, and that's where Tamar came in. So these people are descendant of Tamar, but directly of Judah. Like I say, we have to remind ourselves that this is their family story. They know, so they don't have to identify who Perez is. They all knew. So it was Judah, and then after Judah through Tamar, Perez, and to Perez was born Hezron, and to Hezron was born Ram, and to Ram Abinadab, to Abinadab was born Nahshon, and to Nahshon Salmon, and to Salmon was born Boaz, and to Boaz Obed, and to Obed was born Jesse, and to Jesse David. And so we have 10 generations given us there, from the time of Judah, or Judah's son, to the time of David. Now, as it turns out, that's about 600 years, because that is the entire time of the sojourn in Egypt, which was about 400 years, because there's 150 years or so before slavery. There's 250 years of slavery. It's about a 400-year sojourn in Egypt. And then there's the time of the Judges, which we think is about another 270 years or so. It's hard to tell in the book of Judges because the stories of the Judges overlap one another. So you just can't add up all the years given because some of those years run concurrently. But in any case, from the time of Judah and his son Perez to the time of David, who is the second king of Israel 40 years after the period of Judges stops, we've got 600 to 650 years, and we only have 10 names of the genealogy. And so it appears that this is the highlights, that this is not every single ancestor. If that was so, because we know from the book of Matthew, where the genealogy of Jesus is given, that it says that Salmon was the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz was the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse. If we don't have any genealogy, any generations at all skipped, then we have Boaz being directly Rahab's son. And we also have then their son, Obed, being the grandfather of David. And that only gives us 3 generations to cover the entire book of Judges. So I think there's some other generations in there. I don't think that that Rahab was, the 4 or 5 great grandfather of David. She was probably closer to 10 or 12 great grandmother of David. And it might be that Ruth was not the direct great grandmother of David. She might have been the 2nd or 3rd great grandmother. In any case, however many generations we don't have, we definitely have these recorded, and we know that there is a direct line of descent through the people of God who kept these meticulous records of genealogies, and we have a number of them recorded in the scriptures. But what did we find? That we found that there was a Redeemer. We found in the product of the Redeemer, in the Son, there was one who brought joy. There was one who restored life. There was one who sustained in old age. And it was all done because Boaz was this faithful Redeemer. And again, in Hebrew, the same word for Redeemer is for nearest kinsman, because there is a familial obligation that if someone is close to you, as someone is kin to you, there is a responsibility. And of course, that wasn't just in ancient Israel, or there, though, it was one of the main ways that the legal system worked. But today, even though our legal system isn't based on kinship and tribal membership, but still, isn't there responsibilities that are tied to kinship? With kinship, with closeness, there is responsibility. And even if it's not kinship, even if it's just affinity, even if it's just friends, friends have an obligation to show and take care of one another. We have the saying that when somebody's acting up, somebody will say, "Hey, come get your boy," right? Why do they need to come get this guy? Because he's their boy, right? He's one of theirs. With affinity, with friendship, and certainly with kinship, there comes a great responsibility. And we are so happy that when we did need it greatly, that came for us our Redeemer, right? When we were helpless, when we needed someone to, with compassion, come and take responsibility for us and our dire situation, that one did that. And so in the Old Testament, Redeemer is tied to kinship. In the New Testament, there's a different connection. Redemption and Redeemer is tied to salvation, because this is one of the ways in which the great work of Christ is described. In Luke 24, as Jesus was walking with those two disciples on the road to Emmaus, they said this: "We were hoping it was he who was going to redeem Israel." Well, they were right. They were temporarily disappointed because they thought they weren't right. But Jesus explains it in the scripture and says, "Nah, but you were. You were right. I am the one who's come to redeem Israel." Of Galatians 4 and verse 5, he came that he might redeem those who are under the law. And in Galatians 3, redeem them from the curse of the law. And if we weren't under the law, we were pagan ancestry. Well, he covers that too. Titus 2:14, he gave himself to redeem us from every lawless deed. So whether your ancestors were of the law and under that curse, or whether they were a law unto themselves and practiced lawlessness, in either case comes Christ the Redeemer, to redeem those under the law, redeem from the curse of the law, and to redeem us from every lawless deed. Now, Boaz's redemption of Ruth, I don't know what it cost. I don't know how much that land acquisition cost him, and all, but it was money well spent, whatever it was. But it wasn't money that redeemed us in the ultimate redemption by our blessed Redeemer, as it says in 1 Peter 1, "Knowing that you were not redeemed with perishable things like silver or gold from your futile ways of life inherited from your forefathers, but instead with precious blood, as of the Lamb unblemished and spotless, the blood of Christ." And so, if that redemption of Ruth and Naomi, if that redemption was blessed and bore good fruit, if that redemption was kind and generous, if that redemption was blessed, how much more us, and how much more our Redeemer, and that which he did for us at great price to himself, redeeming us from our lawless deeds, redeeming us from the law, redeeming us with his own blood to be his people for his own possession. Let us rejoice in that and think of that great blessing and privilege that was given us, and the great thing done for us in our redemption.